Have you ever noticed that Jesus never spoke the way ordinary people speak? He did not react to circumstances. He did not describe problems. He did not narrate what was already obvious. Whenever Jesus opened his mouth, something shifted in the fabric of reality itself. People were healed. Atmospheres changed. Fear dissolved. Destinies were redirected. And this did not happen because he spoke louder, nor because he insisted more forcefully, nor because he tried harder to convince anyone. It happened because Jesus spoke from an internal position that was radically different from the position from which most people speak. Most people speak from fear, from lack, from what they see, from what they feel, from what already happened. Jesus spoke from what he knew. He spoke from what he perceived in the invisible realm. He spoke from alignment. He spoke from the kingdom. That is why one of the most disruptive statements he ever made sounds so simple, yet carries immeasurable implications. The kingdom of God is within you. Luke 17:21. This was not a metaphor. It was not poetry. It was not religious language meant to comfort people. Jesus was revealing a structural truth about reality itself. He was saying, there is a place inside you from which true reality originates. And as long as you continue to speak only from what happens outside of you, you will remain imprisoned by what already exists. But the moment you learn to speak from the place I speak from, you begin to give form to what does not yet exist. Most people use words as reactions. Jesus used words as creation. That distinction alone explains almost everything. Words as reaction versus words as creation. Think about how most human communication works. Something happens. Then a person comments on it. They describe it. They complain about it. They analyze it. They label it. Their words are always after reality. Jesus inverted that order. His words did not come after reality. Reality came after his words. This is why Proverbs 18:21 says, "Death and life are in the power of the tongue." This verse is often treated as poetic exaggeration. It is not. It is describing a mechanism, a law, a structure of how reality responds to consciousness expressed through language. Jesus understood this perfectly. That is why when faced with a violent storm, he did not say, "This storm is strong." He said, "Peace, be still." Mark 4:39. When confronted with a paralyzed man, he did not say, "This man cannot walk." He said, "Rise, take up your bed." Mark 2:11. When standing before a tomb, he did not say, "Lazarus is dead." He said, "Lazarus, come out." John 11:43. Jesus never spoke about situations. He spoke to situations. And this is exactly what you have been trained not to do. From early childhood, you were trained to describe, comment, analyze, complain, lament, and repeat what you see. You were taught to use language as a mirror of reality, not as a tool that reshapes reality. Jesus taught the opposite. He said, "Whoever says to this mountain, 'Be lifted up and thrown into the sea,' and does not doubt in his heart, but believes that what he says will happen, it will be done for him." Mark 11:23. Notice something crucial. Jesus did not say, "Whoever prays to God about the mountain." He said, "Whoever says to the mountain." He was not teaching prayer techniques. He was revealing a law of alignment between internal conviction and spoken word. Reality responds to words that originate from a heart aligned with God. And here is the part almost no one notices. Jesus was not only teaching about faith, he was teaching about internal posture. Because not every word creates. Only words that come from the right place do. The place from which words are born. So where is this place? Hebrews 11 verse 1 gives us a clue. Faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not yet seen. This means that Jesus spoke from a certainty already established before anything appeared in the physical world. He did not speak to see if it would work. He spoke because internally it was already done. When he said, "Your sins are forgiven," Mark 2 verse 5, forgiveness was already a reality in the spiritual realm before anyone saw its effects. When he said, "Be clean," to the leper, Matthew 8 verse 3, cleansing was already decreed before the body reflected it. Jesus was not using words to invent reality. He was using words to reveal reality. He was bringing into visibility what had already been settled in the invisible. This changes everything, because now you understand something fundamental. Learning to speak like Jesus is not about memorizing phrases. It is about shifting the point of origin from which your words emerge. You do not change your life by adjusting words at the surface level. You change your life by changing the internal place from which your words are born. Jesus himself said, "Out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks." If your heart is filled with fear, your words will carry fear. If your heart is filled with lack, your words will carry lack. If your heart is filled with frustration, your words will carry frustration. But if your heart is filled with truth, your words carry authority. That is why Romans 12:2 says, "Be transformed by the renewal of your mind." Because as long as your mind is shaped by the world, your words will be echoes of the world. But when your mind is reshaped by divine truth, your words become instruments of transformation. Jesus did not speak like ordinary people, because he did not think like ordinary people. He said, "I do nothing on my own, but speak just as the Father has taught me." John 8:28. This means his language did not originate from culture, not from fear, not from past experience. It came from heaven. And that is what you are being invited to learn. Not mystical speech, not religious language, but effective alignment. Because reality shifts when language. You can continue speaking the way everyone else speaks and continue living the way everyone else lives. Or you can learn to speak the way Jesus spoke and watch reality begin to respond differently. And everything begins with a question that is simple but deeply uncomfortable. Where do most of your words come from? From faith or from fear? From truth or from appearances? From heaven or from earth? Because that is the place where your reality is being shaped. Why most people are trapped without realizing it. If you observe your own speech honestly, you will notice something unsettling. Most of the time, you do not speak to create, you speak to react. You do not use words to direct reality, you use words to comment on reality. And this feels harmless, but it is precisely what keeps everything the same. Every time you describe something as permanent, you reinforce it. Every time you comment on something as inevitable, you seal it. Every time you repeat something as identity, you anchor it inside yourself. Jesus understood this deeply. That is why he never allowed circumstances to dictate his vocabulary. He did not accept the language of the problem. He introduced the language of the kingdom. When the disciples said, "Teacher, we are perishing," Mark 4:38, Jesus did not agree with that narrative. He did not say, "Yes, this is dangerous." He stood up and spoke something entirely different from what the situation suggested. He introduced a new reality through speech. When Martha said, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died," John 11:21, Jesus did not respond within the language of loss. He responded from the language of eternity. "I am the resurrection and the life," John 11:25. When religious leaders labeled the blind man as cursed and sinful, Jesus labeled him as a stage for divine manifestation, that the works of God might be displayed in him. John 9:3. Jesus did not accept labels, he replaced them. And here is the principle operating beneath all of this. Reality organizes itself around the dominant vocabulary. What is named consistently gains strength. What is repeated emotionally takes root. What is accepted as identity becomes experience. That is why Proverbs 4:23 says, Guard your heart above all else, for from it flow the springs of life. The heart here is not the physical organ. It is the center of consciousness, the place where words are formed before they become sound. If your inner world is dominated by fear, your speech will express fear. If it is dominated by scarcity, your speech will express scarcity. If it is dominated by anxiety, your speech will express anxiety. And then, without realizing it, you create exactly what you are trying to escape. The discipline Jesus taught. Pause before speaking. Jesus trained his disciples to reverse this process, to not react first, to not speak first, to not accept first, to pause, to see, to align, and only then speak. That is why he said, "Do not worry, saying, 'What shall we eat or drink?'" Matthew 6:31. He knew anxiety creates an internal field that produces lack. He then said, "Seek first the kingdom," because correct speech is born from correct alignment. And this is where most people fail. They try to change their words without changing their internal position. They try to speak positively while thinking negatively. They try to declare promises while identifying with problems. They repeat scripture while internally believing it will not work. Jesus did not teach repetition, he taught conviction. He said, "Whoever says and does not doubt in his heart." Mark 11:23. Notice the standard. Not volume, not enthusiasm, not frequency. The standard is internal unity. Words only create when they are congruent with the internal state. That is why James says, "A double-minded person is unstable in all his ways." When you speak one thing and feel another, your words fracture. Jesus spoke with wholeness. That is why people said, "He speaks as one who has authority." Authority does not come from tone, it comes from internal coherence. Words as seeds. The practice begins. Here is where everything becomes practical. You must begin to see your words not as sounds, but as seeds. Every sentence you release is something you plant into your internal field. When you say, "I always mess things up," you plant an identity. When you say, "Nothing ever works for me," you plant a pattern. When you say, "It's always hard," you plant resistance. When you say, "I can't," you plant limitation. And then you wonder why your life reflects exactly those things. Jesus did not plant those seeds. He said, "All things are possible to the one who believes." The Father loves the Son and shows him everything. Nothing will be impossible for you. He was not inflating ego. He was restoring identity. You were not created to be small. You were not created to be powerless. You were not created to be a victim. You were created in the image of God. Genesis 1:27. That means you were created to speak and shape reality, not universes, but experiences, paths, choices, inner climates, and external environments. But as long as you use words to diminish yourself, justify yourself, defend yourself, or compare yourself, you will live beneath what you were called to live. Jesus never justified himself, never defended himself emotionally, never explained himself anxiously. He spoke truth, and truth did the rest. And perhaps now you are beginning to see something profound. Your current language is not neutral. It is constructing the environment you live in. That can feel frightening, but it is also deeply liberating. Because that means you are not trapped, you are not doomed, you are not at the mercy of chance. You are a participant. This is not human power. It is divine cooperation. There is a place within a human being that rarely receives attention. It is quieter than thought, deeper than emotion, more stable than circumstances. Most people live their entire lives without ever consciously inhabiting it. Jesus never left it. This is the reason his life unfolded the way it did. This is the reason pressure did not distort him. This is the reason chaos did not govern him. This is the reason reality appeared to bend around his presence. Jesus referred to this place as the heart, but not in the modern emotional sense. In the language of Scripture, the heart is the seat of governance. It is the inner throne, the place from which perception, intention, and direction flow. Above all else, guard your heart, for from it flow the springs of life. Proverbs chapter 4, verse 23. Notice the language carefully. Not feelings, not moods, not reactions. Springs, directions, currents, outcomes, paths. Life does not emerge randomly. It flows from a source. Jesus understood that most people attempt to change their lives by modifying behavior while leaving the source untouched. They adjust actions, suppress emotions, force discipline, or pursue new environments, yet preserve the same governing center. Jesus taught that this approach cannot produce lasting change. No one can serve two masters. Matthew chapter 6, verse 24. This is not merely a moral statement. It is an ontological one. A divided center produces a divided life. When fear and faith compete for the same inner throne, reality becomes unstable. When trust and control alternate positions, outcomes fluctuate. When peace is conditional and confidence depends on circumstances, life oscillates. Jesus lived from a unified center. This is why he could walk into volatile situations without absorbing their volatility. Consider how often Jesus was surrounded by emotional turbulence. Crowds pressed in desperation. Disciples panicked. Religious leaders projected hostility. Suffering confronted him constantly. Yet his internal state did not mirror the environment. The environment responded to him. This reversal is the key. Most people absorb the emotional atmosphere around them and then attempt to act wisely from within that disturbance. Jesus did the opposite. He carried a stable center into unstable environments, and those environments reorganized around him. This is not mysticism. It is governance. Jesus did not react from the surface of consciousness. He responded from the center. That is why his words carried authority. People were astonished at his teaching because he taught as one who had authority. Matthew chapter 7, verse 29. Authority is not volume. It is not intensity. It is not force. Authority emerges when a person speaks from a place that is not internally divided. Jesus' authority flowed from coherence. This coherence explains one of the most misunderstood moments in the Gospels, Gethsemane. In the garden, Jesus experienced profound anguish. My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Matthew chapter 26, verse 38. This was not weakness. This was honesty. But observe what follows. Not my will, but yours be done. Matthew chapter 26, verse 39. This statement is often misinterpreted as resignation. It is not. It is alignment. It is the human mind releasing control to preserve the stability of the center. Jesus did not suppress emotion. He did not deny fear. He did not escape discomfort. He simply did not allow emotion to displace the governing center. This is crucial. Most people believe that inner peace means the absence of distress. Jesus demonstrated that peace means the absence of internal fragmentation. Distress can be present, pain can be present, uncertainty can be present, and yet the center can remain intact. This is what allowed Jesus to move through suffering without being consumed by it. The modern world has language for something similar. Studies on heart-brain coherence show that when the heart maintains a stable rhythm, the brain receives signals of safety. The nervous system regulates. Cognitive clarity improves. Emotional volatility decreases. Jesus taught this principle spiritually when he said, "Peace be with you." John chapter 20, verse 19. This was not a greeting. It was a transmission of state. Peace was not something Jesus felt occasionally. It was something he inhabited consistently. That is why he could sleep during a storm. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. Mark chapter 4, verse 38. This moment reveals everything. The storm did not disturb him. The panic of others did not disturb him. The threat of death did not displace his center. The miracle did not begin when he spoke to the wind. The miracle began when he remained anchored while others lost their anchor. Only afterward did he speak. This is the pattern Jesus always followed. Center first, action second, reality response third. Most people reverse this order. They act from anxiety, react from fear, speak from urgency, and then wonder why reality feels hostile. Jesus demonstrated that reality mirrors the state of the one engaging it. This is why he taught, "Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." Matthew chapter 6, verse 21. This is not about money. It is about what occupies the center. Whatever holds the center organizes perception, attention, and interpretation. If the center is fear, everything appears threatening. If the center is scarcity, everything feels insufficient. If the center is trust, reality begins to open. Most people try to change outcomes while preserving the same center. Jesus taught that outcomes follow the center, not the other way around. This explains why Jesus refused to be hurried. Urgency did not govern him. Even when Lazarus was sick, Jesus delayed. John chapter 11. From a human perspective, this seems irresponsible. From the perspective of inner governance, it was precise. Jesus did not move according to external pressure. He moved according to internal alignment. When he arrived, Lazarus had already died, and yet Jesus was not destabilized. Why? Because death did not sit at his center. Trust did. This is why he could say, "Did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God?" John 11, verse 40. Notice the order. Believe first, see second. The center precedes the manifestation. This principle explains why Jesus taught that faith is not a feeling. Do not be afraid, only believe. Mark 5, verse 36. Fear and faith cannot occupy the same center simultaneously. One governs, the other yields. Jesus did not teach people to suppress fear. He taught them to relocate the center. When the center shifts, fear loses authority naturally. This is what makes Jesus' teachings so different from moral instruction or behavioral advice. He was not managing symptoms, he was reestablishing internal government. Paul understood this deeply. The peace of God will guard your hearts and your minds. Philippians 4, verse 7. Observe the sequence. Heart first, mind second. When the center is guarded, when decisions align, life changes. Jesus never promised the absence of difficulty. In this world, you will have trouble. John 16, verse 33. What he promised was something far more powerful. But take courage. Courage is not confidence in circumstances. It is stability of center in spite of circumstances. Those who live from this center are not enslaved by what happens to them. They pass through scarcity without losing trust. They face silence without losing faith. They endure delay without collapsing into anxiety. This is why some people experience inexplicable transformation, not because they discovered a new technique, but because they changed the place from which they lived. They stopped living from fear. They stopped living from reaction. They stopped living from urgency. They began living from alignment. Jesus taught that faith is not emotional excitement. Faith is knowing. When the heart knows, the mind stops fighting. When the mind stops fighting, the body calms. When the body calms, perception expands. When perception expands, reality reorganizes. This is the invisible power that changes life. It does not announce itself. It does not force outcomes. It does not demand immediate proof. It remains. And because it remains, reality adjusts. Perhaps you are beginning to sense why so many past efforts did not last. Not because you lacked discipline, not because you lacked belief, but because you tried to change life while preserving an unstable center, reacting, controlling, rushing, defending. Jesus taught another way: stillness, alignment, trust, abiding. When he said the kingdom of God does not come with outward signs, Luke 17 verses 20 through 21, he was teaching that true transformation begins with an internal reordering so profound that at some point the external world simply follows. This is why some changes appear sudden. They are not sudden, they were prepared invisibly. And now we arrive at a decisive moment. There is one final adjustment, subtle, quiet, often overlooked, that seals this entire teaching. It is the difference between temporary insight and permanent transformation. It is the reason Jesus could maintain alignment without effort. In the next part, you will understand what this final adjustment is, why most people resist it, and how it explains the deepest shifts a human life can undergo. There is one adjustment so quiet that most people never notice it. It does not announce itself, it does not demand effort, it does not feel dramatic. And yet without it, every other attempt at change eventually collapses. Jesus lived from this adjustment continuously. It is the reason his inner center remained stable regardless of circumstances. It is the reason his faith did not fluctuate with outcomes. It is the reason reality responded to him without resistance. This adjustment is the release of internal control, not passivity, not irresponsibility, not indifference, but the surrender of the need to govern reality from the surface of the mind. Most people attempt to change their lives by tightening control. They monitor outcomes obsessively, rehearse possible failures, and manage every variable they can perceive. This creates the illusion of safety while quietly destabilizing the center. Jesus taught the opposite. He taught that life reorganizes when control is released at the deepest level. This is why his most consistent invitation was not effort, but trust. Do not be afraid. Do not worry. Believe. These were not moral commands. They were instructions for internal relocation. Jesus understood that the human mind cannot both control and trust simultaneously. One must yield. When control dominates, faith becomes theoretical. When trust governs, faith becomes embodied. This explains one of Jesus's most misunderstood teachings. Whoever seeks to save their life will lose it, and whoever loses their life for my sake will find it. This is not about physical death. It is about the internal struggle for control. The attempt to preserve certainty, security, and predictability from the mind results in fragmentation. Releasing the demand for control allows the center to stabilize. Jesus demonstrated this principle constantly. He did not attempt to manage outcomes. He remained aligned with purpose. When crowds demanded signs, he did not comply. When disciples pressured him, he withdrew. When danger approached, he did not panic. Why? Because his security was not tied to results. It was anchored in relationship. Jesus lived from union with the Father, not negotiation with circumstances. I and the Father are one. This statement is not merely theological. It reveals an internal posture of absolute alignment. Jesus did not experience himself as separate, unsupported, or exposed to reality. He experienced himself as held. This sense of being held is the foundation of peace. Most anxiety is rooted in the belief that one must carry life alone. Jesus did not carry life. He abided. Abide in me, and I in you. John 15:4. Abiding is not effort. It is resting in alignment. When a person abides, they stop forcing outcomes. They act, but without anxiety. They choose, but without compulsion. They move, but without panic. This is the state Jesus lived in. It explains why he could remain calm while others rushed. It explains why he could speak gently in moments of intensity. It explains why his presence itself produced change. Modern psychology recognizes something similar. When a person releases hypervigilance and shifts into a state of perceived safety, the nervous system recalibrates. Creativity increases. Insight improves. Emotional regulation stabilizes. Jesus taught this spiritually long before psychology existed. "Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." Matthew 28:28. Rest was not the reward for finishing work. Rest was the condition for meaningful work. Jesus never taught people to work themselves into peace. He taught them to begin from peace. This reverses everything. When peace becomes the starting point, action becomes clear. When peace becomes the center, decisions align. When peace becomes the foundation, reality reorganizes. This is why Jesus said, "My peace I give you, not as the world gives." John 14:27. Worldly peace depends on conditions. Jesus' peace precedes conditions. This is the silent adjustment that most people resist. They want peace after certainty. They want calm after resolution. They want rest after control. Jesus offered peace before all of it. This is what makes his teaching difficult. It requires relinquishing the illusion that anxiety is necessary for survival. It requires trusting that life is not hostile by default. It requires moving from effort into alignment. This adjustment explains why Jesus did not instruct people to visualize outcomes, repeat affirmations, or force belief. He instructed them to relocate their trust. Your Father knows what you need before you ask. Matthew 6:8. This statement dismantles anxiety at its root. If the Father knows, then vigilance is unnecessary. If vigilance is unnecessary, the center can rest. When the center rests, the mind follows. When the mind follows, the body calms. When the body calms, perception opens. And when perception opens, reality begins to shift. Jesus taught that transformation does not come from trying harder. It comes from yielding deeper. This is why silence was so important to him. He often withdrew to lonely places and prayed. Luke 5:16. Prayer for Jesus was not persuasion. It was alignment. Silence is where the need to control dissolves. Silence is where the center stabilizes. Silence is where trust becomes embodied. Most people avoid silence because it confronts the internal noise they use to feel in control. Jesus embraced silence because it returned him to center. This is the final adjustment, to stop negotiating with reality and begin resting in alignment. To stop demanding proof and begin sustaining trust. To stop reacting and begin abiding. When this adjustment occurs, life does not instantly become easy, but it becomes coherent. Delays no longer threaten identity. Obstacles no longer provoke panic. Uncertainty no longer destabilizes the center. This is why Jesus could face the cross without losing peace. The cross did not define him. Alignment did. Jesus never taught that life would be free of pain. He taught that peace does not require the absence of pain. It requires the presence of trust. Into your hands I commit my spirit. Luke 23:46. This was not defeat. It was completion. The center remained intact until the end. This is the transformation Jesus invites every person into. Not control, not effort, not performance. Alignment, trust, abiding. Perhaps you are beginning to recognize why your life feels stalled, not because nothing is happening, but because something deeper is being invited to release. The need to control, the need to rush, the need to resolve everything immediately. Jesus would say, "Your faith has made you well," not because you forced belief, but because you stopped resisting trust. In the next part, we will begin translating this inner adjustment into lived experience, how it expresses itself in daily decisions, relationships, work, and moments of uncertainty. This is where transformation becomes tangible. When the inner center stabilizes, something subtle but unmistakable begins to happen. Life does not instantly become perfect. Problems do not vanish overnight. Circumstances do not instantly rearrange themselves. What changes first is not what happens to you, but how reality meets you. And this shift alters everything. Jesus never taught people to escape the world. He taught them how to stand within it without being ruled by it. Once the center is no longer oscillating between fear and control, daily life becomes the training ground where alignment is embodied. This is where most spiritual teachings stop short. They explain the principle, but not the living. Jesus did both. He showed how an aligned center expresses itself in ordinary moments: work, relationships, conflict, delay, uncertainty. Consider how Jesus approached decisions. He did not make choices from urgency. He did not respond from pressure. He did not move to satisfy expectation. He moved when clarity emerged. Even his disciples struggled with this. They constantly urged him to act faster, to respond more aggressively, to seize opportunities. Jesus resisted all of it. Why? Because haste is a symptom of inner instability. When the center is calm, timing becomes intuitive. Jesus demonstrated this when people tried to force him into public acclaim. They wanted to make him king by force, but he withdrew. John chapter 6, verse 15. This moment reveals a profound principle. Opportunity does not determine alignment. Alignment determines which opportunities are received. Most people chase opportunities because they fear missing out. Jesus declined them because he feared misalignment more than loss. This is what happens when the center is stable. You no longer grasp. You no longer rush. You no longer react. You respond. And response always emerges from presence. This changes how a person works. Work is no longer driven by anxiety about the future or validation from others. It becomes an expression of alignment. Effort remains, but struggle diminishes. Jesus said, "My yoke is easy and my burden is light." Matthew chapter 30, verse 30. He was not describing the absence of responsibility. He was describing the absence of internal resistance. Most exhaustion is not caused by work itself. It is caused by working from fear, comparison, and self-protection. When the center is grounded, action becomes clean. You do what is yours to do. You release what is not. You trust the unfolding. This also transforms relationships. Jesus did not relate from neediness or emotional dependency. He loved deeply, yet remained free internally. This is why he could give without depletion. Most relational suffering comes from expecting others to stabilize what we have not stabilized internally. When the center is unstable, relationships become compensatory. They are used to regulate fear, insecurity, and identity. Jesus never used people to regulate his inner state. He loved from fullness, not from lack. This is why he could say difficult truths without hostility. This is why he could forgive without bitterness. This is why he could remain present without attachment. When the center is steady, love becomes clear. It does not cling. It does not manipulate. It does not fear abandonment. It gives freely. Jesus taught this when he said, "Love your neighbor as yourself." Mark chapter 12, verse 31. This is often misunderstood. It does not mean self-sacrifice to the point of erasure. It means that the quality of love you extend flows directly from the quality of stability you possess. A fractured center produces fractured love. A center produces grounded love. This is also why Jesus taught so much about forgiveness. Forgiveness is not moral superiority. It is liberation from inner disturbance. Holding resentment destabilizes the center. It keeps the nervous system activated, the mind rehearsing, the heart contracted. Jesus forgave not because others deserved it, but because peace mattered more than grievance. Father, forgive them. Luke chapter 23, verse 34. This was spoken from alignment, not denial. Jesus did not deny injustice. He refused to let it govern his center. This same principle applies to uncertainty. When the center is unstable, uncertainty feels threatening. The mind rushes to resolve it, predict it, control it. When the center is stable, uncertainty becomes spacious. Jesus lived with uncertainty constantly. He did not know how every moment would unfold, yet he did not fear the unknown. Why? Because his trust was not in outcomes, it was in alignment. This is why he taught, "Do not worry about your life." Matthew chapter 6, verse 25. This is not carelessness. It is confidence in the intelligence of life when approached from trust. Jesus did not teach people to stop planning. He taught them to stop projecting fear into planning. When the center is calm, the future is approached creatively, not defensively. This also changes how a person experiences delay. Delay no longer feels like rejection. Silence no longer feels like abandonment. Waiting no longer feels like punishment. Jesus delayed often. He delayed responses. He delayed interventions. He delayed explanations. And yet, his delays were purposeful, because delay allows alignment to deepen. Most people interpret delay as failure because their identity is tied to speed and confirmation. Jesus interpreted delay as preparation. This is why he said, "The kingdom grows and the man does not know how." Mark chapter 4, verse 27. Growth is invisible before it is visible. The center must stabilize before the manifestation appears. This is also why Jesus warned against divided attention. No one who puts a hand to the plow and looks back is fit for the kingdom. Luke chapter 9, verse 62. This is not condemnation, it is description. A divided center cannot sustain forward movement. When the center is pulled backward by fear, regret, or nostalgia, progress stalls. Jesus was always oriented forward internally, even when physically present. This orientation was not ambition, it was alignment. The stabilized center also transforms how a person handles failure. Failure no longer defines identity. Mistakes no longer collapse confidence. Correction no longer threatens worth. Jesus corrected his disciples often, yet never withdrew relationship. Why? Because worth was not performance-based. When the center is grounded, feedback becomes information, not condemnation. This allows learning. This allows growth. This allows resilience. Jesus demonstrated this with Peter. Peter failed publicly, dramatically, and painfully. Yet Jesus restored him without shaming. "Do you love me?" John chapter 21. Jesus did not focus on the failure. He returned Peter to center. Love's identity stabilizes action. Action reorganizes life. This is the order Jesus lived by. Perhaps you are beginning to see how deeply practical this teaching is. This is not abstract spirituality. It is a way of inhabiting life, a way of working, a way of relating, a way of waiting, a way of deciding. When the center remains still, life begins to move naturally. Doors open without force. Paths clarify without panic. Strength appears without strain, not because effort ceased, but because resistance did. This is the paradox Jesus embodied. Effort remains, but struggle dissolves. The mind still thinks, but it no longer battles itself. The heart still feels, but it no longer governs. The body still acts, but it no longer rushes. And when this happens, reality begins to respond differently. People notice, circumstances soften, Opportunities align, not because you manipulated them, but because you were no longer in conflict with yourself. This is why Jesus' presence changed rooms. This is why people felt seen even without words. This is why peace followed him. He was not trying to fix life, he was aligned with it. In the next part, we will explore what happens when this way of living is tested, when pressure intensifies, when loss occurs, when prayers seem unanswered. This is where alignment is either abandoned or deepened. Jesus faced these moments, and how he navigated them reveals the final layer of transformation. Remain with it. What comes next addresses the moments when faith feels hardest and most necessary. There comes a moment in almost every life where the teachings sound true, the principles make sense, the alignment feels real, and yet nothing seems to change on the outside. Prayers are made, faith is exercised, the inner center feels calmer, but circumstances remain the same. This is the moment where many people abandon the process, not because they stop believing in God, but because they quietly conclude that alignment did not work. Jesus anticipated this moment. He knew that the greatest tests of faith would not come in moments of crisis alone, but in moments of silence, in seasons where nothing collapses dramatically, yet nothing moves forward either. This is where the deepest transformation either stabilizes or dissolves. Most people assume that if alignment is real, results should be immediate. Jesus taught the opposite. He taught that alignment is often proven precisely when results are delayed. This is why he said, "Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed." John 20:29. This statement is not about blind faith, it is about internal maturity. Seeing before believing requires no inner stability. Believing without seeing requires the center that is no longer dependent on confirmation. Jesus understood that dependence on signs creates fragility. When faith is sustained only by visible progress, it collapses the moment progress slows. This is why Jesus often refused to give signs on demand. A wicked and adulterous generation seeks for a sign. Matthew 16:4. This was not an insult, it was a diagnosis. A mind that needs constant proof has not yet stabilized internally. Jesus was not withholding miracles, he was protecting the process. Because the greatest change he sought was not situational, it was structural. This becomes especially clear when prayers appear unanswered. Jesus prayed, and not all of his prayers resulted in immediate change. In Gethsemane, Jesus prayed intensely. "If it is possible, let this cup pass from me." Matthew 26:39. And the cup did not pass. This moment is critical. Jesus did not lose alignment when the prayer was not answered the way he desired. Why? Because his trust was not conditional. He did not measure faith by outcomes. He measured faith by fidelity to the center. This is where many people struggle. They trust as long as things improve. They surrender as long as clarity appears. They remain peaceful as long as progress is visible. Jesus remained aligned even when the path narrowed. This reveals something essential. Alignment is not a tool to control reality. It is a way of standing within it. When prayers are unanswered, the mind wants to interpret silence as absence. Jesus taught that silence is often presence without explanation. My God, why have you forsaken me?" Matthew 27:46. This cry does not mean Jesus lost faith. It means he fully entered the human experience of uncertainty without abandoning alignment. This is important. Faith does not eliminate difficult emotions. Faith prevents those emotions from becoming the center. Jesus felt anguish. Jesus felt sorrow. Jesus felt abandonment. But he did not let those feelings redefine his identity or displace trust. This is the difference between pain and despair. Pain can exist with alignment. Despair begins when alignment is lost. This distinction matters deeply. Many people think they have lost faith because they feel discouraged. In reality, they have only discovered that faith is not emotional numbness. Jesus never taught emotional suppression. He taught internal anchoring. This anchoring becomes most visible in moments of loss. Jesus experienced loss. He lost John the Baptist. He lost followers. He was misunderstood by his own family. He was betrayed by a close friend. Yet loss did not harden him. It did not make him cynical. It did not make him withdrawn. It did not make him reactive. Why? Because his center was not built on what could be taken away. Do not store up treasures on earth. Matthew 6:19. This was not an economic lesson. It was an identity lesson. When identity is attached to outcomes, loss becomes devastation. When identity is anchored in alignment, loss becomes passage. Jesus wept at Lazarus's tomb. He did not deny grief, but grief did not govern him. This balance is crucial. Many people believe they must choose between faith and grief. Jesus embodied both. He allowed grief to pass through him without letting it define him. This is the mark of a stable center. Grief moves, fear arises, doubt whispers, but none of them sit on the throne. This also explains how Jesus responded to injustice. He did not pretend injustice was acceptable. He confronted it. Yet he did not become consumed by resentment. Resentment is a sign that injustice has displaced the center. Jesus refused that displacement. This is why he could say, "Love your enemies." This is not moral heroism. It is internal protection. Hatred destabilizes the center. Forgiveness preserves it. Forgiveness is not agreement, it is release. Release of the need to carry what poisons alignment. Jesus understood that a poisoned center cannot heal the world. This brings us to endurance. Endurance is not persistence through force. Endurance is consistency of alignment over time. Jesus endured not because he was emotionally invulnerable, but because his trust was deeper than circumstances. He set his face towards Jerusalem. This phrase signifies inner resolve, not stubbornness, not denial, but clarity. Jesus knew where he was going, even when the path was painful. Clarity stabilizes the center. This is why Jesus taught that the cost of following him was high. Whoever wants to follow me must deny himself. This denial is not self-hatred. It is the denial of the false center, the egoic need to control, protect, and secure identity through outcomes. Following Jesus means relocating identity from performance to alignment. This is why many people start the journey but do not continue. Alignment demands patience. Trust demands endurance. Faith demands relinquishment of timelines. Jesus never promised speed. He promised life. And life unfolds organically. Consider the resurrection. From the disciples' perspective, everything had failed. Their hope collapsed. Their expectations were shattered. Their understanding was incomplete. And yet, the greatest transformation occurred in silence, behind a sealed stone, out of sight. This is a pattern. What appears inactive may be incubating. What appears lost may be transforming. What appears delayed may be aligning. Jesus trusted this process fully. That trust allowed him to surrender completely, and surrender became resurrection. This is not metaphorical, it is structural. When the center is no longer defended, life can move freely. This is the final test of alignment. Can you remain grounded when nothing confirms it? Can you trust without reassurance? Can you stay present without resolution? Jesus could, and that capacity changed everything. Perhaps this speaks directly to your current season. Maybe you have done the work. Maybe you have aligned internally. Maybe you have released control. And yet, nothing seems to move. Jesus would not say you are failing. He would say you are standing at the threshold where faith becomes embodied. This is where many turn back, but this is where transformation seals. Remain, not because it is easy, but because it is real. Before we move into the final part, take a moment to recognize something important. If you have stayed with this message this far, it is not accidental. Something in you recognizes this truth, not as information, but as resonance. If this teaching has helped you see Jesus' message with new depth, clarity, and relevance for real life, then stay connected. Follow this channel, subscribe, remain here. This space exists for those who are not looking for quick motivation, but for lasting transformation. Share this message with someone who feels stuck, confused, or exhausted from trying to control life. And remember, when nothing changes outside, everything may be being decided inside. Alignment always precedes manifestation.